You are listening to HOA Control Freaks. I brought facts, not feelings. Karen held a stack of sealed envelopes and screamed that opening them was only for her. You are out of warnings, and I am done being nice. Her voice cracked on the last word, spit flying, face red under the porch lights that were just starting to turn on. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, hood strings pulled tight, watching her lose it over paperwork I was legally allowed to see. The envelopes were old, yellowed at the edges, and she clutched them like they were state secrets. Behind her, a rolling file cart sat crooked on the driveway, folders half spilling out. I knew what was in those envelopes. I had already seen the copies. This was Lakeview Crest HOA Incorporated, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Joan Lee was about to find out that I had reopened the one case she thought she had buried for good. I work at an auto body shop as an estimator. I document damage, I write quotes, I timestamp everything, and I keep receipts. That mindset saved me when the HOA came back around with the same bogus violation they had used to shake down another homeowner 3 years ago. The case had never made sense. A neighbor got hit with a tow authorization and a $500 fine for a trailer that was supposedly parked illegally, but the photos were taken at night with no metadata, the notice was backdated, and the minutes from that month had 2 different versions floating around. The neighbor paid it and moved. I found the old file when I was digging through the community portal last month, and the timeline did not add up. Same violation language, same laminated notice template, same hand-filled blanks. Then I got my own notice 2 weeks ago, same exact wording, same blank template, and I knew Joan was running the same play. She stepped forward, envelopes pressed to her chest. "I do not care what you think, I care what the rule says." Her favorite line. She had said it to me twice already, once on the phone and once in the parking lot when I asked why my portal uploads kept failing right at the deadline. The deadline was tomorrow. The HOA was threatening collections language, and I needed to stop it before it hit my credit. Joan was the vice president, and she had a committee for enforcement. That committee was her, the property manager who worked from home in another state, and a management rep who only showed up for votes. Joan ran the show. I pulled my phone out, screen already recording. "Go ahead," I said. "Explain why those envelopes are sealed when the minutes are supposed to be public record." Her mouth twitched. She glanced at the file cart, then back at me. "Those are drafts. They are not finalized." I nodded slowly. "So the meeting happened 3 years ago, but the minutes are still drafts." She did not answer. She turned and tried to shove the envelopes back into the cart. One slipped and hit the driveway. I bent down and picked it up before she could. The envelope had a date stamp from the management company, 3 years old, and it was addressed to the board. I held it up. "This is a draft?" Joan lunged and snatched it back. "You do not have permission to touch HOA property." I took a step back, phone still recording. I smiled. "I already requested copies through the portal. I am just waiting for them to process. But it is interesting that you are out here at my house with the originals." Joan stuffed the envelope back into the cart and turned to face me full on. She pulled out her laminated policy sheet, the one she always carried, and waved it like a badge. "This property is under Lakeview Crest jurisdiction. You signed the covenants. You agreed to follow the process. If you do not comply by tomorrow, the fine escalates and we move to collections." I tilted my head. "What fine?" "I never got a hearing. I never got a chance to dispute it." She pointed at the cart. "The notice was sent. You got it. You had 14 days. I shook my head. "I got the notice 10 days ago. It said I had 7 days. That is not 14. Her face went blank for a second, then she pivoted. "The policy allows for shortened timelines in repeat violations. This is not a repeat. This is the first time I have ever been cited for this." She smiled, cold and tight. "The property was cited before. Previous owner. That makes it a repeat for the lot." I stared at her. "That is not how this works." Joan shrugged. "I do not care what you think, I care what the rule says." She turned and started dragging the cart back toward her car, which was parked crooked at the curb with the door still open. I followed. "Joan," I said, "I want copies of the minutes from the enforcement committee meeting where my case was discussed." There was no meeting yet. Your hearing is next month." "Then why does the notice say the fine is already approved?" She did not answer. She yanked the card up over the curb and shoved it into her trunk. Folders slid everywhere. She did not care. She slammed the trunk and turned back to me, breathing hard. "If you keep harassing me, I will file a complaint with the board." "I am standing on my own property," I said. "You came here." She got in her car, slammed the door, and drove off. I stood there in the driveway, phone still recording, watching her taillights disappear down the street. My neighbor 2 doors down, an older guy named Carter, was standing on his porch with his arms folded. He had watched the whole thing. He shook his head and went back inside without a word. I went inside and pulled up the portal on my laptop. I had submitted my records request 2 weeks ago. Status: pending. I clicked through to the request details. The timestamp said it had been received, but there was a note in red text at the bottom: "Incomplete submission, resubmit with original request form." I had used the form from the portal. I clicked the link to download the form again. It was a different version. The fields were in a different order. I checked the metadata. The form had been updated 3 days after I submitted my request. I screenshotted everything. I saved the old form and the new form side by side. Then I went back to the original case file, the one from 3 years ago. The neighbor who got towed was named Malik. He had lived 4 houses down. I pulled up the violation notice from his file. Same template. Same blanks filled in by hand. Same laminated sheet language. I zoomed in on the signature line. It was signed by Joan Lee, vice president, but the date was 2 weeks before the meeting minutes said the committee had reviewed it. I sat back and stared at the screen. She had backdated the notice. She had signed it before the meeting even happened. That meant the decision was made before any review, before any hearing, before Malik ever had a chance to respond. I checked the tow authorization. It was dated the same day as the notice, also before the meeting. The tow company was the same one Joan always used, a place called Northside Towing. I had seen their trucks around the neighborhood before, always with Joan standing nearby holding a clipboard. I opened a new tab and searched for Northside Towing. Their website had a testimonials page. One of the quotes was from Lakeview Crest HOA, praising their fast response and professionalism. I clicked through to the staff page. The owner was listed as Greg Norton. I did a quick search for Greg Norton and Lakeview Crest. Nothing suspicious, but I found a permit application from 2 years ago for a tow zone sign installed at the neighborhood entrance. The applicant was Joan Lee, and the contractor was Northside Towing. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. Joan was using the tow company as enforcement muscle. She would issue a violation, backdate the notice, authorize a tow, and then the committee would rubber stamp it after the fact. The minutes would get edited to match the story. Malik never stood a chance. He paid the fine, paid the tow fee, and left. And now she was doing it to me. I pulled up my own notice again. The violation was for an unregistered vehicle parked on the street overnight. My truck. I had been recovering from a shoulder injury for the past 6 weeks, could not lift much, could not drive stick for a while, so the truck had been parked on the street instead of in the garage. It was legal, it was registered, it had current plates, but Joan did not care. She wanted the fine, and she wanted me gone. I grabbed my phone and called my buddy Nathan, who works as a gate vendor technician for a security company that services a bunch of HOAs in the area. He picked up on the second ring. "Yeah? Nathan, it is me. I need a favor." "What is up?" "Can you pull access logs for Lakeview Crest? I need to see who accessed the gate system and the portal admin tools over the past month." He was quiet for a second. "That is going to cost me if they find out. I will owe you. I am fighting something here, and I need proof." He sighed. "Give me until tomorrow. I will see what I can get." "Thanks, man." I hung up and went back to the laptop. I needed more. The minutes were the key. If I could prove Joan had been altering them, editing them after the fact to cover her tracks, I could blow the whole thing open. But I needed the original versions. The portal only had the final approved copies. I needed the drafts, the ones she was carrying around in those envelopes. I opened my email and drafted a message to every homeowner in the community. I kept it short. Subject line: Records request assistance needed. Body: I am investigating a discrepancy in HOA enforcement records and need access to any old meeting minutes, notices, or committee correspondence you may have saved. If you have received a violation or tow notice in the past 3 years, please reply with a copy. Confidential. I hit send and watched it go out to 63 addresses. Within 10 minutes, I had 5 replies. 2 people said they did not have anything. 3 people attached PDFs. I opened the first one. It was a notice from 2 years ago, same template, same hand-filled blanks, signed by Joan. Dated before the meeting minutes said the case was reviewed. I opened the second PDF. Same thing. The third PDF was a tow authorization, also backdated. Every single one was signed by Joan before the committee meeting. I printed everything and started building a binder. I used dividers to separate the cases. Malik. 2 others I did not know. My own case. For each one, I had the original notice, the tow authorization if applicable, the meeting minutes, and the timeline discrepancies highlighted in yellow. The pattern was clear. Joan would issue the notice, authorize the tow, and then backdate everything to make it look like the committee had reviewed it first. The minutes would get edited later to reflect the story she wanted. I checked my phone. Nathan had texted. Got the logs. Meet me tomorrow morning, usual spot. The usual spot was a coffee shop near the mall. I texted back. 10 a.m.? He replied with a thumbs up. I closed the binder and sat back. I was tired. My shoulder ached. I wanted to be done with this. But Joan was not going to stop unless I made her. She had gotten away with it for years because nobody had connected the dots. Malik paid and left. The others paid and stayed quiet. I was the first one to push back, and she was panicking. That is why she showed up at my house with the cart full of envelopes. She was trying to control the narrative before I could get the records. The next morning, I met Nathan at the coffee shop. He was already there, sitting in the corner with a folder. I grabbed a coffee and sat down across from him. "You are going to owe me big for this," he said. He slid the folder across the table. I pulled it open. Inside were printouts of the access logs for the Lakeview Crest portal. I scanned the entries. Joan had logged in 37 times in the past month. Most of the logins were normal, but 6 of them were late at night, after midnight, and they were flagged with admin-level edits. I looked up at Nathan. "What does admin-level mean?" He leaned forward. "It means she was editing the back end, changing records, deleting uploads, modifying timestamps. Can you prove it?" He tapped the page. These entries show the file paths. She edited the meeting minutes 3 times last month. Same file, 3 different edits. I pulled the revision history. She deleted entire paragraphs. I stared at the logs. She was erasing evidence. I flipped to the next page. There was another entry, dated 2 weeks ago, the same day I submitted my records request. Joan had accessed my account and flagged my submission as incomplete. "She sabotaged my request," I said. Nathan nodded. "Yeah. She changed the form on the portal so your old submission would not match. Then she flagged it as incomplete and added the note." I sat back and took a breath. "Can you testify to this?" He shook his head. "Not officially. I will lose my contract. But I can give you the logs. You can submit them as evidence." "That works." He handed me a USB drive. "It is all on here. Original logs, revision history, access timestamps. If you need me to verify anything off the record, call me." "Thanks, man. I owe you." He stood up and left. I sat there for a minute, staring at the folder. I had her. Joan had been running the scam for years, and now I had the proof. But I needed one more thing. I needed to catch her in the act. I needed her to lie on the record, in front of witnesses, so there was no way she could spin it later. I pulled out my phone and called the management company. A woman answered, professional and bored. Lakeview Crest Management. This is Diane. "Hi, Diane. My name is Alex. I am a homeowner at Lakeview Crest, and I need to escalate a records request issue." She sighed. What is the issue? I submitted a request 2 weeks ago, and it was flagged as incomplete. But I used the form from the portal, and then the form was changed after I submitted it. I need to speak to a supervisor. There was a pause. Hold on. The line went quiet for 30 seconds, then a man picked up. This is Richard, regional supervisor. What can I help you with? I explained the situation. I kept it calm, factual, timestamps and form versions and access logs. Richard listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You are saying the vice president altered the portal to block your request? Yes. I have the logs. Can you send them to me? I can. But I also want to meet in person. I have additional evidence of backdated violations and altered meeting minutes. This is not just about my case. This is a pattern. Richard exhaled slowly. Okay. Can you come to the office this afternoon? 2 p.m.? I will be there. I hung up and checked the time. It was 11. I had 3 hours. I went home and printed everything. The binder was now 2 inches thick. I added the access logs, the revision history, and a timeline chart I had made showing the pattern of backdated notices across 4 different cases. I also printed a copy of the doorbell video. The doorbell video was the trump card. I had not told anyone about it yet. 3 nights ago, I had been woken up by a noise outside. I checked my phone and saw a motion alert from my doorbell camera. I pulled up the feed. Joan was standing on my driveway, alone, in the dark, holding a clipboard and a flashlight. She was taking photos of my truck. She spent about 5 minutes walking around it, checking the plates, checking the windows, writing notes. Then she got back in her car and left. The video was timestamped. It was taken after midnight, 2 days before I got the violation notice. She had been trespassing, gathering evidence, building the case before the committee ever reviewed it. I let her threaten a lien, because that threat would look terrible on the record. I was not going to reveal the video yet. I was going to wait until the meeting, until she was locked into her story, and then I would email the proof to every homeowner right before the meeting so Joan would walk into an ambush. But first I needed to make sure the meeting happened. I needed to force Joan to defend herself in front of the board and the management company. I arrived at the management office at 1:50. The office was a small suite in a strip mall, squeezed between a nail salon and a tax prep place. I walked in with the binder under my arm. Diane was at the front desk. She looked up and nodded. Richard is in the back. Go ahead. I walked down a narrow hallway and found Richard in a conference room. He was maybe 50, gray hair, tie loosened, looking tired. He gestured to a chair. I sat down and slid the binder across the table. This is everything, I said. Notices, minutes, access logs, revision history, timeline analysis. Joan Lee has been backdating violations, altering meeting minutes, and blocking records requests. I have 4 separate cases documented here, including my own. Richard opened the binder and started flipping through. He did not say anything for a long time. He stopped on the access logs and stared at them. Then he flipped to the revision history. Then he went back to the notices. Finally, he looked up. This is bad. I nodded. I want the fine dropped, the case closed, and I want Joan removed from any enforcement role. Richard shook his head slowly. I cannot make that call. The board has to vote. But I can recommend it. And I can suspend enforcement pending an internal review. That is a start. He closed the binder and leaned back. I need to bring this to the board. Can you attend a meeting? When? Tomorrow night. Emergency session. I will notify the board and send out the agenda. I will be there. He stood up and shook my hand. For what it is worth, I am sorry this happened. This should not have gotten this far. I left the office and sat in my car for a minute. I was shaking. Not from fear, just adrenaline. I had done it. I had built the case, gathered the proof, and forced the meeting. Now I just had to survive it. That night I got an email from Richard. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. the next day. The agenda had one item: review of enforcement procedures and records access compliance. Joan was copied on the email. So was the rest of the board. 5 people total. Joan, the president, the treasurer, the secretary, and 1 at-large member. I did not know any of them, except Joan. I replied to the email and attached the binder as a PDF. I also attached the access logs and the revision history. I did not mention the doorbell video. That was still my trump card. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "This is Joan. We need to talk." "I do not think we do. You are making a huge mistake. You do not understand how this works." "I understand fine. You have been backdating violations and altering records. I have proof. The management company has proof. The meeting is tomorrow." She was quiet for a second. Then her voice changed, lower and harder. "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I have a committee for that." I hung up. The next day dragged. I went to work, but I could not focus. I kept checking my phone. No new emails, no calls. At 6 p.m., I went home, changed into clean clothes, grabbed the binder, and drove to the community clubhouse where the meeting was being held. I arrived at 6:45. The parking lot was empty except for 2 cars. I walked inside. The clubhouse was a small building with a main room, a kitchenette, and a storage closet. Folding chairs were set up in rows. A table was at the front with 5 chairs behind it. Richard was there, setting up a laptop and a projector. He looked up and nodded. "Early. Good." I sat down in the front row. At 6:50, the board members started arriving. The president was a tall man in his 60s, gray beard, calm expression. The treasurer was a woman in her 40s, business casual, looking annoyed. The secretary was younger, maybe 30, nervous energy. The at-large member was an older woman, stone-faced. Joan was the last to arrive. She walked in at 6:58, carrying her laminated policy sheet and a folder. She did not look at me. She sat down at the table and stared straight ahead. At 7, Richard stood up and called the meeting to order. He went through the agenda. 1 item. He explained that a homeowner had raised concerns about enforcement procedures and records access, and that an internal review had been initiated. He asked me to present my findings. I stood up, walked to the front, and opened the binder. I went through it page by page. Malik's case. The 2 other cases. My own case. For each one, I showed the notice, the tow authorization, the meeting minutes, and the timeline discrepancies. I showed the access logs. I showed the revision history. I showed the form change that sabotaged my records request. I kept my voice calm and factual. I did not editorialize. I just showed the evidence. When I finished, the room was silent. The president looked at Joan. "Joan, do you want to respond?" Joan stood up. She held the laminated policy sheet in front of her like a shield. "This is a coordinated attack on the board. This homeowner has been harassing me for weeks. He has been making baseless accusations and threatening legal action. The enforcement process is outlined in the covenants. I followed the process. If he does not like the process, he can move." The president frowned. "Joan, the logs show that you edited the meeting minutes multiple times after they were approved. Can you explain that?" Joan's face went red. Those were corrections. Typographical errors. 3 times in 1 month? She did not answer. The treasurer leaned forward. "Joan, the notices in these cases are all dated before the committee meetings. How is that possible?" Joan slammed her hand on the table. "I do not care what you think, I care what the rule says. The rule allows the vice president to issue preliminary notices pending committee review." The president shook his head. "That is not in the covenants." Joan opened her folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. She held it up. "It is in the enforcement guidelines. Right here." The president reached out and took the paper. He read it, then looked up. "Joan, this is a draft. It was never approved by the board." Joan's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Richard. "Richard, you approved this." Richard shook his head. "I approved the meeting schedule. I never approved enforcement guidelines that allow you to bypass the committee." Joan turned to the other board members. "This is a setup. He is manipulating the records. He is trying to get out of a legitimate fine. The secretary raised her hand. Joan, I have a question. Why did you access the portal at 2 a.m. last Tuesday? Joan froze. She looked at the secretary, then at the projector screen, which was showing the access logs. I was reviewing the agenda. The secretary shook her head. The log says you edited the minutes file. Why? Joan did not answer. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She sat down slowly, still gripping the policy sheet. The president cleared his throat. I think we need to table this and conduct a full audit. Richard, can you coordinate that? Richard nodded. I will start tomorrow. In the meantime, I recommend suspending all enforcement actions pending the audit results. The president looked at the other board members. They all nodded. Motion passes. Joan, you are suspended from enforcement duties effective immediately. We will reconvene in 2 weeks to review the audit findings. Joan stood up, face pale, and walked out without a word. The door slammed behind her. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the president looked at me. I am sorry you had to go through this. We will make this right. I nodded and sat down. My hands were shaking. It was done. Joan was out. The case was closed. But I was not finished. I still had the trump card, and I wanted to make sure Joan could never do this to anyone else. After the meeting, I went home and opened my laptop. I drafted an email to every homeowner in the community. Subject line: HOA Enforcement Audit Update. Body, as you may know, the board has initiated an audit of enforcement procedures. I am attaching evidence of backdated violations, altered meeting minutes, and records access obstruction. I am also attaching a doorbell video that shows the former vice president trespassing on my property at night to gather evidence for a violation that had not yet been reviewed by the committee. Please review this material and decide for yourself whether the current board leadership should continue. A recall petition will be circulated next week. I attached the binder, the access logs, and the doorbell video. I hit send. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. Neighbors I had never spoken to, people who had been fined, towed, threatened, people who had paid and stayed quiet. They all wanted to know what to do next. I told them the same thing. Document everything. Submit it to Richard. Demand refunds. Sign the recall petition. 2 days later, Richard called me. The audit is done. We found discrepancies in 12 cases over 3 years. All of them involved Joan. The board is voting tonight on whether to terminate her and refer the matter to an attorney. What about the fines? All enforcement actions tied to these cases are being reversed. Refunds will be issued within 30 days. That night, the board met again. I did not attend, but Richard emailed me the results. Joan was removed from the board in an emergency meeting, and the bogus fines tied to the case were refunded. The president resigned. The treasurer took over as interim president. A special election was scheduled for next month. The recall petition went around the neighborhood. Within a week, 60% of homeowners had signed it. The remaining board members resigned before the recall vote could happen. The management company stepped in and appointed a temporary board to oversee the transition. Richard stayed on as supervisor, and he promised a full review of the covenants and enforcement guidelines. I got my refund 3 weeks later, $500. I also got a formal apology letter from the new interim president. It was short and professional. We deeply regret the actions of the former board and are committed to restoring trust and transparency. If you have any concerns, please do not hesitate to contact us. I filed it with the rest of my paperwork and moved on. A month later, I was in the driveway working on my truck when Carter, the neighbor 2 doors down, walked over. He had watched the whole thing from the start, the night Joan showed up with a cart full of envelopes. He stood there for a minute, hands in his pockets. Then he said, "You did good." She had it coming. I nodded. "Thanks." He looked at the truck. "You get that shoulder fixed?" "Yeah. Physical therapy. Good as new. Good. We need more people like you around here. People who do not just roll over." He walked back to his house, and I went back to the truck. The neighborhood was quieter now. No tow trucks, no notices, no Joan. A few weeks after that, I got a call from Malik, the guy who had been towed 3 years ago. He had heard about the audit, and he wanted to know if he could get his money back. I told him to contact Richard and submit his case. A week later, Malik called me back. They refunded him. Full amount. Tow fees, fine, everything. He thanked me about 5 times. And then he said, "I wish I had fought it back then." "Me too," I said. "But you did not know. None of us did." He hung up, and I sat there thinking about all the people who had paid, who had stayed quiet, who had moved rather than fight. Joan had gotten away with it because nobody had connected the dots. She had counted on people being tired, being busy, being scared of the HOA. And it had worked. Until it did not. I pulled up the community portal one more time. My account was clean. No violations, no pending actions, no flag submissions. I clicked through to the meeting minutes. The new board had posted them within 48 hours of every meeting. Full transparency, no edits, no deletions. I scrolled down to the enforcement section. It was empty. I closed the laptop and went outside. The sun was setting, porch lights turning on up and down the street. It looked like every other suburban neighborhood in Grand Rapids. Quiet. Normal. A place where people just wanted to live their lives without being harassed by a board member with a laminated policy sheet and a vendetta. But I knew the truth. This was a place where normal life had been turned into an enforcement opportunity, where a vice president could backdate violations, alter meeting minutes, and trespass at midnight with a clipboard, all in the name of the covenants. Where people paid fines they did not owe because fighting the HOA felt impossible. Where the system was rigged and nobody was watching. I had reopened the cold case, and I had caught the person who thought she had erased the evidence. I had gathered the clues, connected the dots, and forced a reckoning. Joan was gone. The board was rebuilding, the fines were refunded, and I had made sure that every homeowner in Lakeview Crest knew exactly what had happened, so it could never happen again. Nathan called me a few days later. He wanted to meet for coffee again. I drove over and found him at the same corner table. He slid a folder across to me. "What is this?" "Northside towing contract," he said. I pulled it from the county records. Joan set it up 2 years ago. The HOA pays them a monthly retainer. In exchange, they get priority response and no questions asked on tow authorizations. I opened the folder and scanned the contract. It was a sweetheart deal. The HOA paid Northside a flat fee every month, and in return, Northside would tow any vehicle Joan flagged, no verification required. The contract even had a clause indemnifying Northside from any liability if the tow was later found to be improper. Joan had built herself a private enforcement army. Does the new board know about this? Nathan shook his head. Not yet. I figured you would want to handle it. I took the folder. Thanks. I will make sure Richard sees this. Nathan finished his coffee and stood up. You are lucky you know. Most people would have just paid the fine. I know. He left, and I sat there staring at the contract. Joan had been running this operation for at least 2 years, maybe longer. She had set up the towing arrangement, altered the records, backdated the notices, and collected the fines. And she had gotten away with it because nobody had the time, the energy, or the documentation to fight back. Until I did. I forwarded the contract to Richard with a short note. Thought you should see this. Might explain some of the towing pattern. Richard replied within an hour. Thanks. We will review this with the new board and terminate the contract if necessary. I will keep you posted. A week later, Richard called me. The board voted to terminate the Northside contract. They are putting out a new RFP for towing services with oversight requirements and a dispute process. Also, we found 2 more cases that match the pattern. We are reaching out to those homeowners now. Good, I said. Let me know if you need anything else. I hung up and checked my email. The new interim president had sent out a community update. The subject line was transparency and accountability. The email outlined the audit findings, the refunds that had been issued, the new enforcement guidelines, and the timeline for the special election. It also included a formal apology to the community and a promise that this would never happen again. I read it twice, then archived it. A few nights later, I was sitting on the porch when I saw Joan drive past. She was alone, windows up, staring straight ahead. She did not slow down. She did not look at me. She just drove through the neighborhood like she was seeing it for the first time. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner, and I did not feel anything. No anger, no satisfaction, just relief. She was gone, and the neighborhood was finally free of her. Carter came over again a few days later. He was holding a clipboard. "We are starting a neighborhood watch," he said. "Real one. Not HOA enforcement. Just neighbors looking out for each other. You want in?" I nodded. "Yeah. I am in." He handed me the clipboard. "Sign here. We meet once a month. No laminated policy sheets allowed." I laughed and signed. Carter took the clipboard back and grinned. "You know, I never liked her. Joan. She always had that look, like she was waiting for you to screw up so she could write you up." "She was," I said. "That was the whole point." He shook his head and walked back to his house. I sat there on the porch, watching the street. It was quiet. Normal. The way it should have been all along. The special election happened 2 months later. I did not run. I did not want to be on the board. I just wanted to live in my house, fix my truck, and go to work without worrying about a midnight trespass or a backdated violation notice. But I voted. Everyone did. Turnout was the highest it had been in years. The new board was voted in by a landslide, and their first act was to pass a resolution requiring full transparency in all enforcement actions. Every notice had to be logged in the portal with timestamps. Every committee meeting had to be recorded. Every records request had to be processed within 7 days. No exceptions. I got an email from the new board president a week later. "Thank you for your diligence and courage in bringing this matter to our attention. Your actions have made our community safer and more accountable. If you ever need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out." I filed the email with the rest of my paperwork and closed the binder for good. Months passed. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. No more tow trucks showing up at midnight. No more notices with hand-filled blanks. No more Joan. People started talking to each other again. The community Facebook group, which had been a war zone of complaints and accusations, turned into a place where people shared recipes and asked for lawn care recommendations. It was boring. It was normal. It was perfect. One afternoon, I was at the auto body shop finishing up an estimate when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost did not answer, but I did. "This is Greg Norton," the voice said. "Northside Towing. I wanted to talk to you." I leaned back in my chair. "Okay." I heard what happened with the HOA. With Joan. "I just want you to know, we did not know she was backdating those authorizations. We got the calls, we did the tows, we sent the invoices. That was it." I did not say anything. "Look," he continued, "I am not making excuses. We should have asked more questions. But we trusted her. She was the vice president. We figured she knew what she was doing." "She did," I said. "She knew exactly what she was doing." There was a pause. "Yeah. Well, I wanted you to know that we are changing our procedures. No more retainer deals. No more priority response. Every tow has to be verified through the board now. With documentation. We are cleaning it up." "Good," I said. "That is what should have happened from the start." He hung up. I sat there for a minute, staring at the phone. Greg Norton was covering his ass, making sure he did not get sued. But he was also admitting that Joan had used his company as a weapon. He was admitting that the system had been broken. And now it was fixed. I finished the estimate, locked up the shop, and drove home. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Trees. Sidewalks. Porch lights. But it felt different. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted. Joan was gone. The board was transparent. The enforcement process was fair. And I had my life back. That night I was in the garage working on the truck when Nathan stopped by. He leaned against the doorframe and watched me for a minute. "You did it," he said. I looked up. Did what? Took down the HOA, Karen. Exposed the scam, got everyone refunded. You are a legend in the vendor community now. Every tech I know is talking about it. I went back to the truck. I just wanted them to stop messing with me. Nathan laughed. Yeah, well, you did more than that. You changed the whole system. That new transparency policy? Other HOAs are copying it. Management companies are updating their contracts. You started something. I did not know what to say to that. I just shrugged and kept working. Nathan stood there for another minute. Then he said, if you ever need anything, call me. I owe you. You already helped, I said. We are even. He left, and I finished the truck. I took it for a test drive around the neighborhood. Everything ran smooth. No more shoulder pain, no more worries about where I parked it, no more Joan. The next week, I got a certified letter from an attorney. I opened it carefully, half expecting some new threat, some new fight. But it was not. It was a settlement offer from the management company. They were offering to reimburse me for legal fees, time spent on the case, and emotional distress. The amount was generous. I read the letter twice, then I called Richard. Did you know about this? He sighed. Yeah. The management company does not want this going public. They are trying to settle quietly. If you accept, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. If you do not, they will fight it. What do you think I should do? Richard was quiet for a moment. That is up to you. But I will say this. You already won. The board is fixed. The fines are refunded. The policy is changed. If you take the settlement, you get paid, and you move on. If you fight, you might win more, but it will take years and cost you a lot of stress. Your call. I thought about it for a few days. Then I called the attorney and accepted the settlement. I signed the non-disclosure agreement, deposited the check, and filed the paperwork. It was over. Except it was not. Not really. Because a few weeks later I got a message on Facebook from a woman in another HOA across town. She had heard about my case. She was dealing with the same thing. Backdated notices, altered minutes, a board member who was running enforcement like a personal fiefdom. She wanted to know what to do. I told her the same thing I had done. Document everything. Gather the proof. Request the records. Build the case. Do not back down. She thanked me and said she would try. A week later, she messaged me again. She had submitted a records request and the board had denied it. She asked if I could help. I sent her the access logs template Nathan had given me, and I told her to find a vendor who could pull the portal records. She did. 2 weeks later, she had her proof. She went to her management company, showed them the evidence, and forced an audit. The board member resigned. The fines were refunded. The policy was changed. She messaged me one more time. Thank you. You saved me. I did not know how to fight this until I saw what you did. I told her she did not need me. She had the proof. She had the courage. She did it herself. But I knew the truth. She did it because I had shown her it was possible. Because I had reopened the cold case and proven that the system could be beaten. Over the next few months, I heard from 3 more people. Different HOAs, same problems. Backdated notices, altered records, selective enforcement, weaponized deadlines. I gave them all the same advice. Document. Request. Build. Fight. Some of them won. Some of them settled. One of them ended up in court, and the HOA lost. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, people were paying attention. Reporters started calling me. I declined the interviews. I had signed the non-disclosure agreement, and I did not want to risk the settlement. But I also did not need the publicity. The work was done. The proof was out there. Other people could take it and run. Nathan called me one last time. You know you are a folk hero now, right? People are calling you the HOA whisperer. I laughed. That is ridiculous. Maybe. But it is true. You showed people they do not have to be afraid of the board. They can fight back. They can win. I hung up and sat there thinking about it. I had never wanted to be a folk hero. I had just wanted Joan to stop messing with me. But somewhere along the way, it had become bigger than that. It had become about every homeowner who had been bullied, fined, threatened, and silenced by a board that thought they were untouchable. It had become about proving that the system could be beaten, that transparency could be enforced, and that even the most entrenched HOA tyrant could be taken down with nothing but a records request that exposes contradictions and edits. Carter stopped by one more time. He was carrying a six-pack. We sat on the porch and drank beer and talked about nothing in particular. The weather. The neighborhood. The new board. After a while, he said, "You ever think about running? For the board?" I shook my head. No. I just want to be left alone. He nodded. Fair enough. But if you ever change your mind, you would have my vote. I appreciated that. But I did not want to be on the board. I did not want to enforce rules or manage budgets or deal with complaints. I just wanted to live in my house, work on my truck, and go to work without worrying about a midnight visit from someone with a laminated policy sheet and a vendetta. The months turned into a year. The neighborhood stayed quiet. The new board kept their promises. The transparency policy held. No more backdated notices, no more altered records, no more Joan. I heard she had moved out of state. Nobody knew where. Nobody cared. She was gone, and that was enough. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when I saw a woman walking down the street with a clipboard. My heart jumped for a second, old instincts kicking in. But then I saw her smile and wave at a neighbor. She was not Joan. She was just a resident doing a neighborhood survey. I waved back and relaxed. The fight was over. The cold case was closed. The neighborhood was safe. And I had done it. I had reopened a case that everyone else had forgotten, connected the clues, caught the culprit, and forced a reckoning. I had turned Joan's own selective enforcement into a documented pattern that got her thrown off the board. I had used a records request that exposed contradictions and edits to dismantle her entire operation. And I had made sure that the HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess, because nobody wanted to admit how deep the corruption had gone. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes. Every backdated notice, every altered record, every midnight trespass, all laid out in black and white for everyone to see. And in the end, Joan had quoted minutes that contradicted her own story, insisting she had followed the process when the timestamps proved she had signed the notices before the meetings even happened. That was the funny karma beat. She had hung herself with her own paperwork, her own need to control the narrative, her own refusal to admit she was wrong. I finished my beer and went inside. The binder was still on the shelf in the garage, 2 inches thick, every page a piece of the puzzle that had brought Joan down. I did not need it anymore. But I kept it. Just in case. Because I knew that somewhere out there another HOA was running the same scam. Another Joan was backdating notices and altering minutes and threatening homeowners who did not have the time or the energy to fight back. And maybe, just maybe, someone would hear about what I did and decide to fight. They would document everything, request the records, build the case, and force a reckoning. And they would win. Because the system could be beaten. I had proven it. Not with violence, not with fraud, not with anything illegal. Just with a records request, a timeline chart, a doorbell video, and the willingness to keep pushing until the truth came out. That was all it took. That was all it ever took. If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. These HOA stories are wild, and there are more coming. I sat at my kitchen table a few weeks later and got an email from Richard. The audit was officially closed. The final report had been filed with the county. All refunds had been processed. The new board was operating smoothly. He thanked me again and said that if I ever needed a reference or a letter of recommendation, he would be happy to provide one. I replied with a short thank you and closed the email. That was it. The case was over. The neighborhood was fixed. Joan was gone. And I had my life back. I went outside and looked at the street. It was quiet. Normal. Boring. Exactly the way I wanted it. No tow trucks. No notices. No laminated policy sheets. Just a suburban neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where people could live their lives without being harassed by a board member with too much power and too little oversight. I thought about Malik, about the other homeowners who had been targeted, about the woman across town who had messaged me for help. I thought about all the people who had paid fines they did not owe, who had stayed quiet because they thought fighting the HOA was impossible. And I thought about how close I had come to being one of them. If I had not kept receipts, if I had not documented the timeline, if I had not found Malik's old case, I would have paid the fine and moved on. Joan would still be running her scam. The board would still be altering records. And nobody would have known. But I had kept receipts. I had documented everything. I had reopened the cold case and connected the dots. And I had won. Not because I was smarter or braver or more determined than anyone else, but because I had treated the HOA conflict the same way I treated damage estimates at work. I had gathered the evidence, cross-referenced the timelines, and built a case that could not be ignored. And that had made all the difference. I walked back inside and closed the door. The binder was still on the shelf. The doorbell video was still saved on my phone. The emails were still archived. I did not need them anymore. But they were there. Just in case. Because the fight might be over, but the vigilance never ends. That is what I learned from this whole mess. You cannot just assume the HOA will do the right thing. You cannot trust that the board is following the rules. You have to document everything, question everything, and push back when something does not make sense. Because if you do not, people like Joan will keep getting away with it. A few months later, I was at a neighborhood barbecue when someone asked me about the case. They had heard rumors, bits and pieces, but they wanted the full story. I gave them the short version. Joan backdated violations, I gathered proof, the board removed her, the fines were refunded. They nodded and said, "That is crazy. You are lucky you fought it." I shrugged. It was not luck. It was just receipts. Carter overheard and laughed. Receipts mode. That is what we should call you. Receipt guy. Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on. But the name stuck. For the next few weeks, whenever someone in the neighborhood saw me, they would joke about receipts. "You got a receipt for that?" "Better keep a receipt." Receipt guy strikes again. It was funny. It was harmless. And it reminded me that I had done something that mattered. The neighborhood was different now. People were more aware. They paid attention to the board meetings, they read the minutes, they asked questions, and when something did not make sense, they pushed back. The new transparency policy made that possible. Every enforcement action was logged. Every notice was time-stamped. Every records request was processed within 7 days. The system worked because people were watching. And people were watching because I had shown them what happened when nobody did. I thought about that a lot. How one person fighting back had changed the culture of the entire community. How exposing one scam had forced systemic reform. How standing up to Joan had inspired others to stand up to their own HOAs. It was not something I had planned. I had just wanted to fix my own problem. But somewhere along the way, it had become bigger than me. And that was okay. Nathan stopped by one last time. He had moved to a different vendor contract, but he wanted to check in. We sat on the porch and talked about the case. He said he had heard from other techs that HOAs across the region were tightening up their procedures, adding oversight, requiring documentation. "You started a movement," he said, "whether you meant to or not." I shook my head. I just wanted them to stop messing with me. He grinned. "Yeah, well, you did that. And you messed with them right back." After he left, I sat there and thought about the whole thing one more time. The midnight trespass, the backdated notices, the altered minutes, the records request that got sabotaged, the meeting where Joan tried to railroad me, the doorbell video that flipped the power dynamic, the trump card I had held until the perfect moment, the audit, the refunds, the resignations, the new board, the new policy, the new culture. It had all started with one simple question. Why does this not make sense? And that is what I wanted people to take away from this. If something does not make sense, dig deeper. If a deadline feels wrong, check the records. If a notice seems backdated, compare the timestamps. If the board is blocking your records request, escalate it. If someone is lying, gather the proof and call them out. Do not assume the system is working. Do not trust the board to police itself. Document everything, question everything, and fight back when you have to. Because that is how you beat people like Joan. Not with anger. Not with violence. Not with anything illegal. Just with receipts. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable routine. The new board met once a month. The minutes were posted within 48 hours. The enforcement committee reviewed every case in public session. The transparency policy was working. And Joan was gone. I did not know where she was, and I did not care. She had lost her power, her position, and her ability to hurt people. That was enough. I kept working at the auto body shop, kept fixing my truck, kept living my life. The shoulder healed completely. The neighborhood stayed quiet. No more midnight visits. No more notices. No more fights. Just normal suburban life. Boring. Peaceful. Exactly what I wanted. And every once in a while, I would get a message from someone in another HOA, asking for advice, asking for help, asking how I did it. And I would tell them, document everything. Gather the proof. Build the case. Do not back down. Some of them would take the advice, some of them would win, and the cycle would continue. One person at a time, one case at a time, one receipt at a time, the system would get a little bit better, a little bit fairer, a little bit more transparent. That is what I learned from all of this. Change does not happen because someone at the top decides to fix things. Change happens because someone at the bottom refuses to accept things the way they are. Change happens because someone keeps receipts, asks questions, and fights back. Change happens because one person decides that enough is enough, and then proves it with evidence that cannot be ignored. Joan thought she had erased the evidence. She thought she could backdate a few notices, alter a few minutes, and nobody would ever connect the dots. She thought she could run her scam forever because nobody had the time or the energy to fight back. She was wrong. And now, she was gone. And the neighborhood was free. I appreciate you hanging in there.